When I say the word entrepreneur to you, what are some of the words or images that pop in your mind? Do you find yourself thinking of things that we would normally associate with entrepreneurs, like innovative and risk taker? Or maybe you've got images playing in your mind of people starting businesses and tech entrepreneurs and investors surrounding them. You probably didn't have images popping in your mind of things like your local county government, or your favorite nonprofit, your local school district, or even a major Fortune 500 company. I want to hang out with you for a minute and unpack that and see if we can have some aha moments as we look at some of these organizations and ask ourselves the question, why not? Why isn't entrepreneurship or entrepreneurism associated with some of these groups? Because I got a claim to make, and here's how it goes. That the further away you move from entrepreneurship as a state of being, as a mindset, as an operating system, the more inefficient you become, the less innovative, and the more unsustainable you become as a person and as an organization. I'm going to back that up here as we talk. But take a look at some of the organizations we just described that we didn't necessarily associate entrepreneurship with. You'll see that most of them, with an exception of a handful, are struggling with issues of innovation, efficiency and productivity, and sustainability. And so I wonder if there's something in there for us to kind of investigate and evaluate. What's interesting about these organizations as you study them and really look at them, some of you work for these organizations, you'll find that at the core of who they are, they see entrepreneurship as a bad word. They see it as something that's highly risky, a bunch of people running around with their hair on fire, causing all kinds of complications and risks and costs. Yet these same organizations will spend millions and collectively billions of dollars a year working on things like leadership. We want to build better leaders. We want to be more innovative. But what they don't understand, and what seems to be missing as the gap, is that entrepreneurship is the fuel that actually allows leadership to even happen. It's the actual engine that drives innovation, and as soon as you take that out of the way, you're just spending money and you're not going to get the results. Let me prove that to you with just the topic of leadership. We've all been through leadership education at our companies and in our organizations. Picture somebody in your mind's eye that you would consider the greatest leader you look up to, someone who's really impacted your life. So I'm going to give you a second to run through the Rolodex of different great leaders you know, so you can pick your number one. But I want to show you what researchers are saying entrepreneurs are. So in other words, from all the universities in the world and all the PhDs, they've been studying entrepreneurial behavior. And most recently, a study was done at Eckerd College, and they just took all this research from decades and decades and compiled it and says, okay, what makes an entrepreneur? And in this case, they were studying business owners, the kind of people who build super high growth companies, the kind of people you and I would associate as entrepreneurs. And they said, okay, what makes these people tick? What makes them different than the average bear? And they started to identify key traits. Things like need to achieve, future focus, independence, persistence, all traits we would assume entrepreneurs have. Okay, so back to your leader. Judging on this room alone, I would say we picked anyone from Richard Branson to Mother Teresa, people who we consider leaders who've influenced our lives, people we would want to be like. If you really start to study these people and look at what they did to become the leader in your life and achieve the things they achieved, you will see them demonstrate the exact same traits. They were highly entrepreneurial in what they did. They showed the same traits that researchers say entrepreneurs show. There's a nugget in there for you and me to unpack. Because remember, I said my claim was that the further away you move from entrepreneurship, the more unsustainable you become, the lower the innovation realities there are. And you'll see this play over and over again with the leaders you respect. They were highly entrepreneurial. So then why is it that in the organizations we were looking at earlier, entrepreneurship isn't celebrated? It's in many cases repressed. And this is why I want to suggest to you that entrepreneurship is the core engine that drives innovation. It is the core engine that builds great leaders. And more importantly, this was the big aha for me. I've been studying entrepreneurs for a long time because I'm an entrepreneur myself, and now we invest in entrepreneurial companies and build them with them. My aha was, wait a minute, entrepreneurship isn't just a word reserved for people who build companies. There's an entrepreneur inside everyone. It's just that some of us use it to build companies, others use it to climb the corporate ladder, yet others use it to homeschool their kids. But as you really start to look at the behaviors that allow people to perform, we're all exemplifying the same traits of the entrepreneur. So no longer can we walk around going, oh, that person's an entrepreneur, but I'm not. What we really have to start saying is, I'm not activating or I'm suppressing my own entrepreneurial capacity, but that person isn't. The reason I say that is because as we start to look at successful organizations and ones that struggle, the consistent pattern is a great appreciation for entrepreneurship and an encouragement towards entrepreneurial thinking versus not. So I'm going to identify for you two real parts to what we find is very successful organizations. Part one is this general appreciation for entrepreneurship. Now, unfortunately, most organizations don't have this. If you work for a company, especially a large company, chances are there may be the intent to say we want to be innovative, we want to do breakthrough things, we want to do creative stuff, but at the heart of the organization isn't the culture to support it. And that's backed up by recent studies. Gallup every year does a research study, and this year they had about 7,000 employees, C-suite, all the way to the factory floor assessed, and they found that 70% of all employees are checked out of their jobs. They're disengaged. And as we study those disengaged companies and the people in those companies, we find that there's very much of a command and control environment. There's this environment that says it's not okay to fail, and it's very anti-entrepreneurial. You'll see this in higher education, you'll see this in school systems, you'll see this in county governments, you'll even see it in corporations. You'll see this over and over again. And they've thrown money at everything from culture shifting to installing gyms to doing all kinds of cool stuff like 401ks, but the numbers aren't shifting. The disengagement is still there. I would argue, and my research suggests, that it's because we're not allowing people to be who they are. We're asking people to check their inner entrepreneur at the door when they walk in, because as soon as they walk in the doors of many businesses and organizations, failure is not an option. Everyone's protecting their job, there's command and control, and the best talent, the best capacity of the people in this room and in the organizations you work with is checked at the door. What a waste. What a waste. So this is part one. Organizations need to start understanding that the best capacity of their people isn't their skill set or their resume, it's their underlying entrepreneurial talent. There are some organizations that are figuring this out pretty well, though. And some of the largest organizations you and I can think of. So even the Department of Defense, which is the largest spend in our P&L as a country, is starting to figure this out. They're starting to realize that the large behemoth platoons and battalions may have worked in one phase of our country's history, but the bigger it gets, the more unsustainable it's becoming, not because of the sheer number of people, but the methodology, the approach. And they're learning from people like the Israelis that there's a very different approach that's much more effective. They're finding that smaller units, elite trained, highly accountable, highly mobile, are much more effective at getting the job done than very large masses of people. Again, this is not to say a big military versus a small military. This is just saying smaller, more efficient units that are highly entrepreneurial, given the opportunity to fail, but highly accountable for the end result. This resonates with me because as I study organizations, both small and large, we are consistently seeing that smaller, more nimble teams that are given entrepreneurial capacity, allowed to fail, allowed to innovate, allowed to create, outperform the larger, more behemoth structures 10-1. So that's part one, making sure that you and I as individuals and as organizational leaders are identifying the entrepreneurial capacity of our people and allowing them to be entrepreneurs within our organization. No longer is it going to be enough to say, no, check your entrepreneurial skills at the door, we just want you to just do your job here. You're going to lose your best talent to other companies in entrepreneurship. But here's part two. I call this the supercharger step, because this is the part of the research that I stumbled across that was the big aha for me. As I was working with entrepreneurs, being a big fan of entrepreneurship, I always assumed that all entrepreneurs are the same, that what works for me as an entrepreneur would work for you. Turns out that just isn't the case. Entrepreneurs, every one of you in this room, come in different shapes and sizes, so to speak, and with different predisposed strengths. I think of them as presets on a radio station. So, you jump in your car when you're driving away today, you've got presets on your radio, and you may press preset number 1 and your favorite radio station plays. Preset number 2, chances are your spouse hijacked it, so it's their favorite kind of music, right? And you go, oh, wait a minute, and you go to preset number 3, it's your favorite talk radio show. Whatever it may be, each button represents a very different genre of music coming out of your speakers. I want you to picture that as I describe to you what we learned about entrepreneurial behavior. We find that entrepreneurs really come in four very different presets. We call it builder, opportunist, specialist, and innovator. And the reason I want to share this with you is so that you can hopefully see yourself in one of these presets. You pre-wired with some of these innate gifts that either you're using in your life or you're not. Builder DNA we found in high-growth entrepreneurs, as we were studying them, tend to be the Pied Pipers. They tend to build these highly scalable businesses very, very fast. The precursor of that in business employees are people who tend to climb the corporate ladder very, very fast and are given significant P&L responsibility and asked to lead large teams. It just seems like they're pre-wired for leadership. That's builder DNA. Then you've got opportunist DNA. These are the rainmakers of our world. When you think of Richard Branson, he's a great example of opportunist DNA. He always wants to be at the right place at the right time, make as much money, and it doesn't really matter what the business opportunity is. If it's an airline, great. If it's flying to the moon, that's fine too. His last book was called Screw It, Let's Do It. Right? That's opportunist DNA. Some of you have that in you. Most professional salespeople are wired with this DNA. Right place at the right time, make as much money as I can, and then when this opportunity starts to die, I'll find the next best place to go. Some of you will sense that DNA in yourself. I really want you to also start thinking about your kids. We're starting to find that some of these precursors are even found in children. And what can you do as a parent as you start to identify these entrepreneurial behaviors in them and foster them? It's pretty fun to do. Specialist DNA tends to activate in the experts of our world, people who go through years and years of schooling or apprenticeship or on-the-job training. So in traditional business, you'll see these people as doctors, lawyers, IT service providers. They're experts at what they do, and they'll set up a business. The same DNA is found in employees. The same DNA is found in students. Now, interestingly enough, for those of you that have specialist DNA, you probably did really well in school, unlike me. Because I don't have a lot of specialist DNA. I was more the opportunist who just wanted to have fun and be adventurous and goof off with my friends and just go do cool stuff and be around people. And my school system just saw me as an outlier. They just saw me as not a good student, and they tried to put as many labels as possible to justify why I wasn't a specialist. See, some of your kids have specialist DNA and some of them don't. The school system would say, well, they still got to fit in the box. I would suggest to you, don't make them fit in the box. They're wired entrepreneurially, just like Richard Branson is or just like Bill Gates is. Bill Gates would be a great example of specialist DNA. And then we've got the innovator DNA. If you've seen the movie The Social Network, you'll see DNA activated in Mark Zuckerberg, at least the way they presented him in the movie. Tinkering around, goofing off, doing something he loved, and whammo, the big aha moment, the big discovery. Most innovators end up being scientists, the creatives, who are just tinkering, inventing, doing cool stuff, and then the whammo, the aha moment happens. So this was the research we found about entrepreneurs, owner-operators of business. The really cool part for me was to realize, wait, this isn't just limited to owner-operators of business. The same imprint is in employees, and more importantly, the same imprint is in our youth. So I want to show you something really interesting we started to see as we started to see schools recognize these tendencies in their students. Just down the street from here in the sleepy little town of Aurora, Illinois, is one of the top 40 high schools in the entire country. It's called Illinois Math and Science Academy, a highly entrepreneurial organization. They run as entrepreneurially as you can be as a nonprofit or government funded. They're very entrepreneurial. Their CIO is an entrepreneur herself. And so what they've done is some very interesting things. They've empowered these kids to identify who they are, and then they allow them to invent and tinker and fail. And in some cases, they create goofy stuff. But in many cases, that same ability in them that's fostered is allowing them, at the high school level, to create mind-blowing technologies. Technologies that are allowing them to build robotic arms to help ALS patients. These aren't $300,000 a year scientists in major corporations. These are high school kids, given the opportunity to be entrepreneurial. But here's the supercharger step I told you about. Here they are at the beginning of the school year, interviewing each other to figure out which ones of them have builder and opportunist and specialist and innovator DNA so they can build better teams. And then they form these teams and they study together, they do projects together. Some of them are launching commercially viable businesses together in high school. That makes me pretty excited. But you know what got me even more excited than that? Was to recognize that this doesn't just start in the high school days, more or less in the college days. We're seeing the same behavioral patterns pop up in kindergarten kids. We're getting calls from organizations, and this particular one is in South Bend, Indiana. The gal who runs it called me and said, Joe, I'm seeing builder tendencies in some of my kids. I'm seeing the opportunists. I can tell who my creative innovators are. And she said, I'm going to build programming to better serve these kids. I'm not going to try and put them in a box anymore. I'm going to allow them to be who they are. And she said, as I'm doing that, I'm seeing game-changing results. I'm seeing behavioral improvements. I'm seeing these kids engage better with each other as they understand who they are and how to leverage each other's gifts. That's the power of recognizing the entrepreneur in yourself, the people around you, and especially our next generation, our youth. So, what's next? For organizations that actually embrace entrepreneurship as the engine, I started by saying if you push it away, unsustainability, inefficiency comes in. But for those that embrace it, there's a great opportunity upcoming, because for the ones that don't, there's some significant entrepreneurial disruption that's going to be happening in your world. It's happening in higher education. In the hallways of power in higher education, they're petrified of what's going on with online education and all these entrepreneurial ventures popping up, bringing free MBA-level education to the internet. If you were in higher education, you'd be freaking out right now. That's the difference between pushing entrepreneurial thinking away and saying, no, we're going to do it one way, versus people who say we're going to be entrepreneurial about it. It's happening in our school system, charter schools popping up. You'll start to see the disruption is starting to happen. It's going to happen with companies too. The large behemoths that want to stay command and control, that want to kind of suppress entrepreneurial activity, will get beaten by the ones who embrace entrepreneurial activity. So, my word of encouragement to you as parents, for those of you that are uncles and aunts and parents and grandparents, is don't necessarily go bang on the door of your school district and say, hey, you guys got to be more entrepreneurial. Joe says, and I agree, you guys have to get your act together. Our kids are going to be collecting Social Security checks before that happens. Truly, it's going to take a long time, a lot of disruption before they get there. But I would encourage you and me as parents to just look at our kids as these little mini entrepreneurs and start to discover what their traits are and just make it part of the family culture for now. That's a huge step in the first place, because wherever else they go, they're told you got to fit in the box. And for those of you that are organizational leaders, I would just encourage you to take a really close look at how you look at the word entrepreneur or entrepreneurship. The more negative your mindset towards it, the chances are the more you are moving towards this unsustainable, high-cost, low-productivity organization. I would encourage you to start to embrace entrepreneurship as the viable engine to drive everything from your leadership development to your strategy, to your operating system, and your innovation plan. You do that, and you'll get to do what great organizations do. I'm going to leave you with this thought that's the signature line. It's a reminder to myself every single day in what we do to always keep it entrepreneurial. Thanks.